Erik, Chapter 25. I flew across the room to Christine's aid. She was already starting to come around when I got there. I lifted her as carefully as I could, feeling every one of my 35 years in my lower back as I did so. I sat her gently in the armchair and knelt by its arm to wait for her to wake fully. It did not take her long. She gasped in a deep breath as she awoke, trying to get back the breath I appeared to have taken away from her. Her eyes returned to mine where I hovered nearby, and her hands grasped the arms of the chair as she mentally reviewed the situation she found herself in. Her eyes widened, as people's do when they haven't seen an acquaintance in a very long time. She looked as if she were picking out things from our time apart to share with me and arranging them in order of importance. Then this look died from her eyes, and it was replaced by bitterness and anger.
So your death was faked, then? A nice touch, monsieur. An easy way to escape responsibility for your crimes.
She glared at me accusingly.
I should have known it was you calling me across the Atlantic. No one else writes music that so completely suits my voice. I mourned for you, you blackguard, and here you were living fancy-free across the sea. I knew. The moment I heard that music box, I knew it must be you.
I was a little taken aback. I did not know you thought me dead, only disappeared. That was how it had to be. How the very people who make such beautiful music could be so vicious, I'll never know. I paused, curious. Was there any proof that I was dead? My suspicion was that someone had been killed during the melee in my chambers beneath the opera, and someone else, thinking quickly, had found my mask and slapped it on the victim in order to pass him off as me and end the violence. It was the only thing that made sense. Christine's answer did not disprove my suspicions, but neither of us would ever really know for sure. I sighed. Oh, my Christine, I have missed you so. My hand seemed to float toward her of its own accord, and picked up a ringlet of her dark hair from where it lay on her shoulder. The color had lightened somewhat to include reddish tints, but it was still the same hair that I remembered. It was currently piled atop her head in an updo, as befitted a married woman, not flowing free as it had been then. It was soft between my fingers. Her reply was scathing and jolted me out of my hairy reverie.
Your Christine? No, monsieur. I was your Christine for one brief night. Then, when you disappeared, I was no longer yours. From that very moment.
She stood up and walked away across the room as if she were defiant and angry. But I saw her wrap her arms around herself again, betraying her uncertainty. My instincts told me something was going on beneath the surface, something that I might be able to exploit to get what I wanted from her. Although I was not sure what it was that I wanted anymore. I wanted her to sing for me, yes, for old time's sake. But I suddenly was not certain if I could go through with my plan to break her and Raoul apart and claim her for my own. There was a child involved now, one who would be hurt if I did that. I had had that happen to me, an interloper trying to come between me and my wife and child. Then death, the ultimate interloper, had succeeded in ripping them both away. I hesitated to do that to another man, no matter how much I hated him. Christine straightened her spine and tackled the next related topic of conversation with straightforwardness.
I hope there has been someone else these 10 long years, monsieur. I would hate to think you have been stuck longing for me.
I thought that could be taken as a fairly vain statement on her part, but I recognized the care with which she said it. Her only concern was for my happiness. Smiling wistfully, I pulled out the miniature photograph I still carried everywhere of Sarah and I, and flipped open the little case to show it to her. Christine took in Sarah's bridal attire in the photograph and realized that she had been my wife. Mingled happiness and jealousy crossed her face in an indescribable mixture. She looked as if she were genuinely happy that I had found love, and just a smidgen sorry for herself that it had not been with her.
She's lovely, monsieur. Erik, I mean.
She smiled shyly as she used my name again for the first time.
And your children?
She said this as if children followed marriage as naturally as the moon followed the sun. I twisted my mouth bitterly at the reminder of our struggle, followed by Sarah's gruesome death. Sarah died giving birth to our first, I blurted out. I could sense the whole story ready to spill from me. I had never really had the opportunity to talk about it before. Everyone I normally found myself surrounded by either knew the story or didn't want to know. I loved her so. She was nearly ready to deliver our baby when she began to bleed. I held her and tried to pray, begged the fates to make it stop and spare her life. But then she told me goodbye and died in my arms. The child was even more monstrous and deformed than I am. It could not have lived. They're buried together, over in the churchyard at St. Anne's. Funnily enough, saying this aloud made an unaccustomed sense of calm come over me. It was as if I had finally admitted some deep truth, and now I could stop pretending that things could have been different. I squeezed my eyes shut against the pain in my heart and felt a tear spill down my good cheek. Then I felt Christine's hand on my face. She wiped the tear from my eye. I didn't even open my eyes, merely gathered her into my embrace and squeezed her tightly. She squeezed me back in sympathy for my heart-wrenching story, rubbing my back in a comforting manner. She made little comforting, crooning noises to try to calm me. I suddenly had a glimpse into her world of motherhood, and I could see that she was an excellent one. Clearing my throat, I released her and moved the conversation onward. And I saw your son, Christine. He's a fine boy. There's a lot of you in him. And he put that music box back together just as accurately as could be. The Vicomte should be proud. I twisted my mouth again as I delivered this platitude. It seemed the man I hated possessed both the ideal wife and the ideal child that I had longed to get with Sarah.
Gustav. His name is Gustav, after my father. I'm certainly proud of him, even if Rel...
She broke off and looked away. I was hardly surprised. I had already seen that Raoul did not seem enamored of his son. I suddenly wondered what the boy endured on a daily basis, and whether it was similar to what I had experienced as an unloved foster child. No, it couldn't be, I decided. At least this Gustav had a mother who loved him. I dismissed the boy from my thoughts as I refocused on her. Christine, you don't know the pain I've been through, living without you. Sarah captured my heart, it's true, but you are the only one who has ever captured my music. Having all this music in my mind and being unable to hear you sing it has been torture. I had to do anything I could to get you to come sing for me.
Sing for you? I don't dare,
she spat, suddenly furious.
The last time I let you manipulate me and my voice, I nearly lost...
She paused, reconsidering the prudence of continuing with whatever she had been about to blurt out.
No, Erik. I have never cancelled a contract for one of my appearances, but I must start with this one. The de Chagny family will return to France as soon as it can be arranged.
She turned her back on me. Suddenly, she staggered backward a step. I blinked as I reacted, moving forward to try to catch her before she hit the floor. But she caught herself and regained her balance. I saw then that she was not weak or unsteady in herself, but instead had been nearly knocked over by her son, running to her and throwing his arms around her middle in apparent panic. I listened to him babble in his native French about a nightmare he had just awoken from. Christine tried her best to soothe him and calm him down. My mind wandered as I watched them. How might my life have been different, with such a caring adult to turn to? I suddenly thought of Mamadop, who I had not thought of for many years. Christine seized on me as a means of distracting the boy from his terror.
Gustav, shh. Gustav, listen. I want to introduce you to a friend of mine. Say hello to Mr. Y.
The boy made a visible effort to master himself, wiped his eyes, and turned to greet me. Time to turn on the carnival charm, I thought to myself, dragging my thoughts out of the past and back to the conversation at hand. I swirled my cloak, gave a little half bow to him, and welcomed him to Phantasma. I spoke English, wanting to see how well he had learned that language. His face grew confused as he looked around him, but he switched languages quickly enough as he answered.
Ce n'est pas Phantasma, monsieur. It's the Astor Hotel. What's Phantasma?
Phantasma is my world, young sir. It's my carnival, a place where light and dark go hand in hand, where you can see all kinds of extraordinarily talented people do what they do best, only for you. People that are extraordinarily beautiful if you can only look beneath the surface. A place where you can sample treats from around the world. And it's the place where your illustrious mother has just agreed to sing, in my new concert hall, which I built especially for her. I aimed this last statement at Christine, who was watching me interact with the boy with an odd look on her face. She was so absorbed with watching how the boy reacted to me that my pointed remark about my concert hall completely escaped her. Gustav was enchanted by my description.
I once saw conjoined twins. Each of them had their own head, but they shared a body. They had a debate between them the time I saw them. And another time, I saw this freak who could put her ankles right behind her head. And
I cut him off. No, my friend, we don't use that word at Phantasma. Each of my performers is a complete human being, a soul like you or, I was going to say me, but I thought that might not sufficiently prove my point. Or your beautiful mother. Tell me, I continued, would you like to see my carnival? He nodded with an almost manic passion in his eyes, and I promised him I would be his personal escort the next day. Christine summoned her maid back, and she took the boy away again after one last embrace. I hoped he would be able to sleep after I had heightened his excitement. Christine watched him go, fondly. I, on the other hand, was rapidly concocting a brand new plan to get what I wanted. But I was not letting her leave these shores without singing for me. I needed validation from her, needed to know my music was something that drew her to me. I needed to know that she could have been mine all along. I didn't know if I could stop myself from claiming her once I got that validation, but I reasoned that I could argue with myself when I got to that point. And maybe she would come to me instead, and then I wouldn't even have to weigh the ethics of the situation. It would all have to start with her singing for me. Fortunately, I had stumbled on a little bit of leverage to use against her. I told her I would not allow her to cancel, and listen to her begin to protest again before I cut in over her. You will sing for me, Christine, or your charming son might just disappear. I'd hate for one of your return tickets to go unused. I'm sure he'll settle into the carnival business nicely as my apprentice. The look of hurt and shock on her face nearly broke my resolve. She began to splutter furiously.
He's my son! You can't take my son! What kind of a monster are you? After everything we've been through, you would do this to me? Would you have relinquished your child to this kind of threat if the tables were turned?
Before I could prevent it, my hand curled into a fist and flew upwards, poised to strike her. I felt that her bringing Eliza into this was a step too far. I mastered my anger and dropped my hand. What I would do, really, doesn't matter. The fact remains that you owe me a debt, and this is how you must pay it. Without me, you would have had a year, maybe 2, as a secondary dancer in the Paris Opera, until you either injured yourself or hung yourself at the prospect of another year spent watching the other dancers receive gifts. I pushed you forward, and I gave you the skills you needed to make sure you didn't embarrass yourself once I got you there. The least you owe me is a performance of my music. That's if you choose not to pay your debt with your own flesh and blood. I will have one or the other. I heard the ugly unkindness in what I said as it spilled from my mouth, but I seemed powerless to stop myself. The very possibility that I had lured her all this way for her to turn her back on me was insupportable. I grabbed her shoulders and shook her hard. Need I remind you, Christine, that I am your angel of music? I've been deprived of your music for 10 years. You must sing for me. Or who can tell what a man as hideous as I am might do? I dropped my hands. Besides, I'll double your fee, I added offhandedly. To my surprise, it was this arrow that found its mark. I had temporarily forgotten the penury she and Raoul were plagued by. She slumped down on the piano bench as I handed her the score I had earlier placed on the piano, confirmed her arrival time at Phantasma for the following morning, and moved back toward the balcony doors. I paused just before I left and turned back to her. Was it worth it, Christine? Was it worth giving up my music just to wallow in some old memories? I watched her shoulders begin to shake with silent sobs. That gave me all the answer I needed. I left her with her regret, walked back out onto her balcony, and made the hop back to my own. The next morning, I had Gangle, Squelch, and Fleck on the lookout for the de Chagny family as soon as they might arrive. I instructed them to bring me the boy as soon as possible. As I waited in my office, I busied myself with odd tasks, thinking all the while about the order in which I would present Phantasma's attractions to him. I wanted to structure his tour so that he saw amazing things at the start and even more amazing things with every stop. I had an ulterior motive when I planned it this way. I wanted the boy to fall in love with my world of carnival, so that if I had to follow through on my threat to separate him from Christine, I could perhaps tell him he had won a vacation or some other facile falsehood. And then he would enjoy himself, at least until he realized his parents had departed, leaving him with me. The last thing I needed was an unhappy child on my hands, especially one who was old enough and intelligent enough to try to scheme his way out of my care. I gave up on administrative tasks and picked up my violin. I'd brought it to my office here when I discovered the mental boredom induced by many of my administrative tasks was perfectly fertile ground for musical inspiration. Too many times I had jotted an idea of a perfect phrase down on a scrap of paper, only to sit down at my piano at home and find it had all faded from my memory, buried under the day's minutiae. Having the violin in my office at least allowed me to quickly and accurately capture these phrases when they popped into my head. I heard my 3 performers on the landing outside my office door. Seized by the desire to make the boys' first experience of my office as dramatic as possible, I pulled the curtains to plunge the space into darkness. then grabbed a candle and retreated to an inner closet. I waited until I heard them all come in, then exited with my candle in hand to amaze and astound my audience. I caught Miss Fleck rolling her eyes at me and had to restrain an answering grin. But Gustav's eyes were wide with what he perceived to be the casual, everyday drama of a life in the carnival. I suddenly realized I had forgotten to sign something. There was a contract on my desk awaiting my signature, signing an amazingly gifted mime to my carnival. The man had mentioned he had had offers from a few different establishments, so I wanted to ensure that mine was prominent among them. I was reluctant to interrupt the drama of the moment, but it couldn't be helped. I knew I'd forget if I didn't do it right this minute. I waved the boy away to poke around my office, telling him I'd be ready in a minute or so. I was occupied in searching my desk, trying to find it, when I suddenly heard my violin. I whirled. Gustav was standing in the middle of my office, with his eyes closed and my violin tucked under his chin. His arms stretched to hold the full-sized instrument, but nevertheless he managed to play the notes with such tenderness and beauty that my eyes widened in shock. It had taken me many months under the guidance of a master to learn how to make it sound like that. And then I'd had to relearn it all after I regained my mind, after my captivity. And here this young man had just picked it up and played it, as easily as if it were an extension of his body. The song he played had some odd intervals between notes in it, and some complex rhythms that didn't settle into my ear quite right until the third or fourth time I heard them. It sounded very much like something I might have written. I knew that I enjoyed playing those kinds of musical tricks on my listeners, introducing something that didn't sound right until after several repetitions, when it would suddenly fall into place. It was the main reason Don Juan Triumphant would never have succeeded, even if I hadn't staged an abduction in the middle of it. The melodies were simply too foreign to modern listeners to have that sense of instant appeal that was necessary for popular acclaim. I'd had a second, more musically orthodox version planned out in case the opera had actually wanted to complete the show's 3-week run, but I haven't even bothered to write it down, certain it would not be needed. I circled Gustav, careful not to startle him lest he drop my precious instrument. I watched his expression most of all. His face wore a blissful expression that I recognized somehow. It seemed very like the feeling that stole over me when I immersed myself in music, writing and playing ceaselessly while hours and days flew by. It was remarkable how similar a musician he was to me. Hard to imagine how Raoul's wooden ear for music had turned out a child so gifted. Unless... no. I froze as my mind made an unexpected connection, and then searched for a way to verify it. Finally, I interrupted the boy, unable to help myself. Gustav, how old did you say you are? He answered without hesitation.
9, monsieur. 10 in a few weeks.
He continued to play my violin, unaware of the turmoil he had just unleashed in my mind. 10 years and 9 months ago, minus a few weeks' time, had been the night I lay with Christine. Was it possible?